Hey gang, I realized in my shorter video about the 12-minute 51-second video about how to make a histogram and frequency table in StatCrunch, I misquoted, I said something that was kind of not entirely true in that video. I said that you really couldn't do cumulative frequency polygons or frequency polygons in StatCrunch very easily. But that's not really true. You actually can do cumulative frequency polygons, or what we know to be ogives, another name for them, or frequency polygons in StatCrunch. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and I'll show you how to do that. So anyway, I picked an exercise from section 2.1 again. This is exercise 8 of 9. And I went ahead and clicked on this icon to import my data into StatCrunch. I opened the data set in StatCrunch. Let me pull up that window for you. So here's my window, my data set in StatCrunch. And I went ahead and sorted it sorted the table in ascending order, and I relabeled the column as raw data. I included a couple of new columns, classes and frequency, and I went ahead and counted up the frequencies for each of the classes here. Okay, they did ask for 5 classes, so I went ahead and created the 5. If we're going to do a cumulative frequency polygon, or ogive, we're going to need to use class boundaries. So I'm going to make a new column next to classes here. So I'm going to insert one column to the left of frequency, and I'm going to call it boundaries. And if you recall, because there's a gap from one class to the next, if you go from 2 to 3, there's a gap of 1 to get from 2 to 3. If you go from 4 to 5, there's another gap of 1. So between each class, there's a gap of 1. So to find boundaries, you have to take half of that gap. Half of 1 is 0.5, and then you're going to add it or subtract it from the upper and lower boundaries to make, or upper and lower limits, excuse me, to make your boundaries. So if you look at the first class, you're going to take away 0.5 from the lower limit, and you're going to add 0.5 to the upper limit. So you're actually going to get a lower boundary of 0.5 up to 2.5, which will be the upper boundary for this first class. Now, rather than put 0.5 hyphen 2.5 like this all in one box, I'm going to go ahead and just list my boundaries individually in separate boxes. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that out and put 2.5 down below. And then the next boundary will be at 4.5. It'll lie between these two numbers, 4.5, 6.5, 8.5, and the last one will be 10.5. You'll notice there's a pattern here. My class width is 2, because notice these limits skip by 2s. Likewise with the upper limits. And the boundaries also skip by 2 each time. And there should be one more boundary than there is classes. I've got 5 classes, but there should be 6 boundaries listed, and I have 6 of them. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a new column called, we're going to call it cumulative frequency, abbreviated here. And I'm going to go ahead and put the cumulative frequencies for my boundaries based on the information I have in the frequency column. So if I'm at a boundary of 0.5, I haven't even reached the first class yet, so my frequency should be 0. Okay. In fact, if you'd like, I'm going to move this column over. I'm going to move some stuff. Let me move frequency. Let's move it. I'm going to move it before boundaries. There we go. There we go. That's better. All right. So I got him out of the way. So cumulative frequency, when you're at 0.5, you haven't entered the first class yet, so your frequency should be 0. When you're at the boundary of 2.5, you're in between these two classes, and if you're at 2.5, that means you're already past this class, so you should have 7 by then. When you get to 4.5, you've just passed the second class, so your frequency should have increased by additional 8. 8 plus the previous 7 makes 15. Then by the time we get to 6.5, we're up to this class, the 10. If we add 10 to the previous 15, we get 25. we go to the next boundary of 8.5, we are now at another frequency of 4. If you add 4 to the previous 25, you get 29. And then finally, if you get to 10.5, you are now at frequency 7. 7 plus the previous 29 is 36. Now here's what I'm going to do. I am going to, there is no graph called a cumulative frequency polygon or ogive per se in the graph menu. But I'm going to go ahead and go to graph. I go to graph and go to what's called an index plot. I am going to use as my numerical data, I'm going to use the cumulative frequency. And then I am going to use a custom series of labels on the x-axis. Okay, and I'm going to use the labels in column boundaries. Okay, the boundaries I made earlier, 0.5, 2.5, 4.5, etc. So I'm using custom, and I'm using the labels in boundaries. And then I'm going to go ahead and compute. And there it is. That is my cumulative frequency polygon. Okay, remember that cumulative frequency polygons or ogives always rise. They might stay level occasionally if you get if you get a frequency of 0 in the middle over here. You could have a cumulative frequency polygon occasionally level off rather than rise at a given point, but here it's always rising. Cumulative frequency polygons should never fall or drop at any point. As you go left to right, it should always be rising or staying level at the very least. So if it's falling, you've done something wrong. You didn't add your cumulative frequencies correctly, or you subtracted accidentally. So yeah, just keep in mind these guys should always be rising or staying level at the very least. But they should never fall or have negative slope at any point. Anyway, so that's how you do a cumulative frequency polygon on StatCrunch. Again, I'll show you real quickly one more time. If you go to graph, go to index plot. We're going to make the what I call the data on the y-axis, or the numerical data, the cumulative frequency, and then I want to do a custom label and use my boundaries as my label, and then click compute, and there you go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this, and what we're going to do next is we are going to do a relative, or we're going to do a regular frequency polygon. And how we do that is I'm going to go ahead and make another column here, and I'm going to call these midpoints for the classes. I'm going to do the midpoints for each of these classes here. I'm going to go ahead and leave some space here in the top row. I'm going to start with a frequency of 0. I'm going to leave a little space here. In the box below under midpoints, I'm going to put the midpoint for the first class. Well, the first class of 1 to 2 has a midpoint of, well, what's halfway between 1 and 2? 1.5. So the next class would have a midpoint of 3.5. Next one, 5.5. Next one, 7.5. Next one, 9.5. But if you recall, with a frequency polygon, you have to have 2 more frequencies than you do in the frequency column you've already listed. I've got 5 frequencies. I'm going to need 7 total when I do a frequency polygon, because I have to have 2 extra zeros for frequencies at the beginning and at the end. Because with a frequency polygon, it always starts and stops on the x-axis. It always starts at 0, and it always ends with 0 for your frequency. So you should always have 2 extra frequencies, starting with a 0 and ending with a 0. As for the rest of them, I'm going to go ahead and copy the frequencies over here. Hopefully this copy thing's not going to be too hard. Well, I don't know, it looks difficult. Let me go ahead and just type them in manually. 7, 8, 10, 4, and 7. All right. I do have a couple of midpoints I'm going to need to add here, though. I'm going to have to follow the pattern here and add an extra one at the end. Notice it skips by 2s each time, which means that the last one's going to be 11.5. And then if I go backwards, notice that you're decreasing by 2 each time. Turns out if you take 1.5 minus 2, you actually get a negative number, negative 0.5. So that'll be my last midpoint, or the first midpoint. And so now that I've created my midpoints and my frequencies, I'm going to go to graph and select index plot again. And this time I want my, this frequency column to be used. And then I am going to go custom labels, and I am going to use the labels under midpoints and compute. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is the frequency polygon for that data distribution right there. Isn't that slick? So let me close that and show you one more time. Once you create your list of midpoints, remember you should always have 2 more midpoints than you do classes. We have 5 classes, so you better have 7 midpoints. The first and last midpoint should have frequencies of 0. The rest of your frequencies should be the same as what you had over here. And then once I've created those columns, I'm going to go to Graph, Index Plot, make my, oh, not this frequency. I guess I'm going to have to go to the end here. It's this column, frequency. And then for custom, I'm going to do custom label, select my midpoints as my labels, and then click compute, and there you go. Any questions, just let me know. You can email me at nlstanley@mccneb.edu. All right, thanks a lot for watching.